In this discussion, I will focus on the representation of the two uses of the term virtual reality, concrete virtual reality technology and the philosophical discourse of virtuality. In particular, I'm interested in exploring how these two uses of the term represent the mediation of and the interaction between culture and nature in the novel Nymphomation by the British science fiction author Jeff Noon. However, before launching into this argument, I'd first like to offer a brief introduction to Noon's novels and provide a short synopsis of Nymphomation, which will be the focus of the following discussion. Between 1993 and 2002, Noon published 5 science fiction novels, which earned him the reputation of being Britain's first star of cyberpunk. Cyberpunk is a subgenre of science fiction that emerged in the 1980s. Cyberpunk fiction is typically set in a near-future dystopian world and includes some sort of virtual technology. As such, cyberpunk is often associated with escapism. Characters seem to flee from the uncontrollable reality of ubiquitous urban sprawls and the limitations of their meaty embodiment to sleek, cool and controllable virtual environments. Nonetheless, Noon's novels register a distinct concern about the interrelationship between these two worlds, one real and one virtual. In Nymphomation, the virtual and the real are represented as being in a dynamic relationship. Rather than one world being closed off from the other, they are shown to be inextricably interconnected and in a relationship of mutual influence. In particular, these points of intersection between the real and the virtual map out connections between the discourses of post-industrial capitalism, emerging mass media technologies, and environmental destruction. These points emerge from Nymphomation's complex and highly fantastic setting and plot. Unlike many other cyberpunk novels whose settings are modelled after the concrete cityscapes of Tokyo, Nymphomation is set in Manchester and appropriates many of the city's streets and locations, as well as its combination of city, industrial and suburban spaces. The plot centres upon a lottery newly introduced to the city by the powerful Anno Domino company as a test run before its national launch. The lottery is run weekly. The players enter the draw by buying tokens called domino bones. The face of the domino bones display dots which randomly change until the televised Friday night draw. The ultimate cash prize of 10 million lovelies is won if the dots on the domino bones settle on the same dots as those broadcast on the televised draw. Anno Domino aggressively advertises the lottery via insect-shaped broadcasting systems that can fly. These mobile advertising units are called blowflies and are designed to communicate the Anno Domino advertisement, play to win, alive and direct to the punters. Because the blowflies are powered by a biomechanical technology, they are a device that is able to physically fly around the streets of Manchester while broadcasting the play to win advertisement. Driven by the blowfly's relentlessly repeated advertisement, each player buys several bones each week. However, after failing to win the weekly draw, the domino bones are invalidated, and the Mancunians immediately throw them away. The number of discarded bones becomes so numerous that they create a second pavement that crunches underfoot. Within this context, the Nymphomation story is driven by a detective plot, which circulates around 2 objectives. Find the reason why some of the lottery's players are being murdered, and 2, discover the relationship between the concrete virtual technology called the Hackle simulation and the mysterious technology that powers Anno Domino's lottery game and blowfly advertisements. Ultimately, the Anno Domino is revealed to be behind the murders, and the technology of the Hackle simulation is revealed to be the force behind the lottery. These twin revelations drive Jazia Malik, the novel's stereotypically rebellious, young, reckless, but prodigious computer hacker, to destroy Anno Domino, which brings about the amelioration of the city's pollution problem. Yippee! Importantly, Nymphomation represents the techniques of computer hacking being brought to bear upon reality as a way to ameliorate environmental problems, in what I will suggest is an act of reality hacking. The notion of reality hacking is drawn from a more familiar concept of computer hacking, which is when someone modifies computer hardware or software in a way that alters the creator's original intent. Likewise, reality hackers see the potential for reality to be manipulated and modified. My central thesis is that Nymphomation's representation of the interrelatedness of concrete and philosophical discourses of virtual reality provides a setting in which the reality hacking emerges as a productive analogy for the notion that one way to help mitigate environmental problems is via discourse. To develop this argument, I will situate my reading of the novel within the theories of virtuality and reality hacking, and secondly, sum up by suggesting why this is a productive analogy for the work of eco-criticism. So, firstly, I will consider the Hackle maze simulation as an example of concrete virtual technology, that is, the hardware and software that support virtual environments. Nymphomation's Hackle maze simulation appropriates the game of life, a computer program designed by British mathematician John Horton Conway in 1970. Like its real-world counterpart, the Hackle maze simulation is a virtual environment inside a hard drive. As Jazir explains, the simulation works when, quote, you set up a map inside a computer, design some creatures to live in it, give them some basic rules, randomise the patterns, and start the program. Evolution inside a computer, end quote. There is, however, one notable difference between the game of life and the Hackle maze simulation, and it involves their respective cybernetic feedback loops. A feedback loop is the cycle by which an outcome of an interaction with a closed system is fed back into and accommodated by that system. In the game of life, this is played out wholly between the cellular automata and the rules of the computer program. In the Hackle maze simulation, on the other hand, the feedback loop also includes humans. Humans are able to interact with the Hackle maze by the computer screen and the wires that connect them to the computer. Through their haptic and visual connection to the maze's virtual reality, users can manipulate its pathways to their desires. The more you loved the maze, records the maze's eponymous inventor in his notes, the more it moulded to your desires. So I want to contrast this Hackle maze simulation with what I call the Anno Domino lottery simulation, which exists mainly in the real world, and which functions as a representation of philosophical discourses of virtuality. In his article about the discourse of virtuality in science fiction and cultural theory, Thomas Foster notes that philosophical understandings emphasise the qualities arising from experiences with concrete virtual reality technologies. According to Foster, discourses of philosophical virtuality argue that virtual reality, quote, only literalises and instantiates a pre-existing set of qualities, end quote. That is, just as users' experience of simulated worlds are mediated by the constructed language of binary code, the philosophical discourse of virtuality sees our experience of the real as similarly always already mediated by culturally constructed discourses. Applied to the Anno Domino lottery simulation, this analogy casts the play-to-win advertisement of the blurflies as the program that mediates the Mancunians' access to reality. Put another way, the repetition of this advertisement constructs a version of reality, a simulation if you will, that naturalises and legitimates post-industrial capitalism's practice of production-consumption waste. The blurflies' advertisement perform the role of order words. Order words are a concept derived from the work of philosopher Felix Guattari. He describes them as short phrases that command life and are inseparable from experiences and large-scale projects. Order words, Guattari argues, mobilise individuals through the propensity of mass media to perpetuate and homogenise dominant ideologies. Quote, post-industrial capitalism tends increasingly to decentre its sites of powers, moving away from structures producing goods and services towards structures producing signs, syntax, and in particular, through the control which it exercises over media, advertising, opinion polls, etc., subjectivity, end quote. In other words, the pervasiveness of refrains such as play to win in mass media construct reality so that 1. Reality is understood as naturally organised according to the post-industrial capitalist model of production, consumption, waste, and 2, that this is internalised by individuals to the extent that the continual desire to consume more material goods is not a question of choice, but understood as the only possible and natural way of relating to the world. So the advantage of understanding the order words of mass media and the discourse of post-industrial capitalism for which it is a mouthpiece, as analogous to a computer program supporting a simulation, is its emphasis upon qualities such as fluidity, becoming, or possibility. Discussions of philosophical virtuality highlight that current or undesirable discourses are not universal and fixed, but they can be transformed and manipulated, just as virtual environments can be. This philosophical notion has been transformed into the cultural movement known as reality hacking or culture jamming. Reality hackers conflate philosophical virtuality's emphasis upon artificiality and flexibility with both their desire to resist dominant ideologies and the skills of computer hacking. As Foster explains, the sensibility of reality hackers emphasises the technology's potential to produce a crisis in ideological legitimation strategies, so that the emergence of reality's consensual or social aspects is imagined as the basis for new forms of political dissent. Reality hackers presume that the experience of virtuality can make people aware of the ways in which reality masks the contingency of the world that seems to confront us as given. From this perspective, virtuality refers to a perception of the world as a product of human labour and creative effort. The concept of reality hacking assumes that the potential accessibility and manipulability of computer programming languages can be translated back into the material world. In these examples of reality hacking, the codes of advertising have been manipulated and subverted to resist the naturalness of the capitalist discourse of consumerism. Before delving any further into the liberatory aspects of reality hacking and how they are represented in information, I want to briefly address a disadvantage of emphasising fluidity and discursive constructiveness for eco-criticism. In particular, I'd like to flag the ideas of French post-structuralist Jean Baudrillard and his notion of simulacra. In his essay, Simulacra and Simulations, the Precession of Simulacra, Baudrillard extends the argument that reality is mediated by discursive signs to its absolute limits. He suggests that discursive signs or images no longer reflect reality, nor do they function to merely mediate our access to material reality. Instead, Baudrillard argues, signs have no relation to any reality whatsoever. That is, they don't mask or conceal reality, they replace it. Obviously, this claim is particularly contentious for eco-critics. If reality is nothing more than competing discourses which are not answerable to the real because it does not exist, then on what grounds, both physical and rhetorical, can discourses that elevate the non-human environment be argued to be better than discourses that exploit it for profit? However, in terms of Baudrillard's borrowing of the qualities and effects that arise from concrete computer technologies, his notion of reality as a simulacra has one main flaw. It conflates reality with the experiences of users inside virtual reality simulations and ignores the concrete computer interface technologies upon which virtual reality simulations rely. So, for example, the computer consoles or the haptic sensors. So, for example, while a user can create impossible landscapes or destroy entire species when inside a virtual simulation, if the hardware running the virtual environment malfunctions due to, let's say, heating from prolonged use, then the virtual simulation is also destroyed. A more instructive analogy, then, must account for the concrete hardware and interface technology upon which the experience of virtuality depends. What I suggest is that Nymphomation's Anno Domino lottery simulation does just this, and in doing so provides a model for ecologically oriented reality hacking. So if the hardware that runs the Blurfly's Play to Win program is included, then Manchester fulfills the role of hardware. That is, Manchester is the console in which the Anno Domino lottery simulation runs. Moreover, the Blurflies fulfill the role of interface, albeit auditory rather than haptic or visual. Indeed, this analogy is bolstered by the source of the Blurflies technology. They are powered by the mathematical algorithms and codes developed to run the Hackle simulation. And furthermore, the novel's lottery game premise plays on associations with traditional video game simulations. Within this context, Nymphomation represents Manchester as being hacked by Jazia. Like all the other characters at the beginning of the novel, Jazia is an unwitting and active participant in the Anno Domino lottery simulation. As well as buying domino tokens for the lottery draw each week, Jazia has a second investment in the Blurflies. He is interested in discovering the mechanism of their inner workings with an eye to reproducing it for profit. His entrepreneurial capitalism is transformed, however, when he's bitten by a Blurfly. This bite allows him to literally see the Anno Domino simulation through the eyes of the blurflies, which reveals to him their enslavement by Anno Domino. Jazzier's changed perspective shifts his interest in the blurflies from that of exploitation to empathy. The different connection to the blurfly interface, so from auditory to haptic, is shown to produce a different experience of the Anno Domino simulation. Jazzier's insight into the plight of the blurflies is the catalyst for his resistance against and ultimate destruction of Anno Domino. Jazzier manages to enter the Anno Domino factory under the cover of a swarm of blurflies and destroy the biomachine that manufactures the domino tokens and programs the play-to-win order words. The destruction of the factory causes... I've lost my page. The destruction of the factory causes the blurfly software and the technology that drives their advertisement to malfunction, which replaces their play-to-win order words with the phrase, dream to win. Whereas play-to-win prescribes what action an individual should do, namely purchase domino bones, dream to win instructs an individual how to act without dictating the outcome of that action. So what a person dreams is not defined by the order dream. The blurfly's new order words represent an altered technological interface and the inauguration of a new simulation, the Dream to Win simulation. No longer subject to the play-to-win blurfly interface of Anno Domino, the Mancunians come to see the post-industrial capitalism for which it stood as only one destructive and disappointing way of viewing the world. God had played a joke on the city, notes the omniscient orator, and they might as well laugh it off. Furthermore, this shift from play to win to dream to win is accompanied by the amelioration of the domino pollution problem. When Anno Domino falls, the discarded domino tokens are revealed to have been eggs all along. They hatch into blurflies and fly away from Manchester. This juxtaposition of the Anno Domino simulation with the Dream to Win simulation is thus symbolically linked to the mitigation of environmental problems. This suggests, to return to the reality simulation reality hacking analogy, the following cybernetic feedback process. 1. The hacked order word interface will encourage alternative value systems to emerge amongst its Mancunian users. 2. This will be fed back into the hardware of the Manchester environment through the ecologically aware actions. And 3. The effect will be improved environmental conditions. So, by way of concluding thoughts on the relevance of this discussion about virtual reality and reality hacking in Nymphomation to eco-criticism, I offer the following comments. So, according to this particular understanding of virtual reality and reality hacking, one that accounts for the hardware as well as the effects of virtual reality technology, the practice of eco-criticism seems to perform the function of reality hacking. It does this by drawing attention to texts that critique the values of dominant post-industrial capitalism, much like the blurfly bite drew Jazzier's attention to the blurfly's alternative perspective, and by focusing on the interconnections between literature, language and the material environment, as does the cybernetic feedback loop created between the Mancunians and Manchester via the blurfly interface. So by changing the current language and metaphors we use to represent the environment, from metaphors that legitimate its destruction to metaphors that acknowledge its life-supporting importance, eco-criticism seeks to foster ideological conditions favourable to the development of policies and actions that reflect ecological concerns. Put another way, eco-criticism hopes that by hacking our current technological language interfaces, we can transform the information that we feed back into the material environment, so as to ensure that humanity's experience of our reality simulation software continues to have hardware to run on. Yeah, that's all.